A billionaire's son was dying. Danger slow and invisible. A rare blood disease eating him from the inside. Only one blood type could save him. AB negative, less than 1% of the population. And for 2 years, 24 months straight, one woman showed up, every single month, rolled up her sleeve, gave her blood, then went back to work, mopping floors in the same hospital. 3 floors below the child she was keeping alive. She had no idea whose veins her blood was flowing through. And he, a man worth $4.2 billion, a man who built an empire on saving children's lives with technology, had no idea that the only thing keeping his son breathing was a woman he walked past every single day without seeing. Then one night he found out everything. And the woman who'd been saving his child for 2 years was right there, on her knees, scrubbing someone else's blood off the hospital floor. What he did next would either change her life forever or prove that gratitude from the powerful always comes with a price. 2 years earlier, Amara had just finished a 1-2-hour night shift. Her feet ached in shoes that had been worn past the point of replacement 6 months ago. Her hands were dry and cracked from hospital-grade disinfectant, the kind that kills everything on your skin, including the skin itself. Her scrubs had faded from navy to something closer to gray. She smelled like bleach and floor wax and other people's pain. It was 7:15 inches the morning. She should have gone home, should have crawled into bed in her small apartment and slept until her next shift started. But instead, Amara turned left at the lobby, past the cafeteria, past the gift shop, down the hallway most people in this hospital didn't even know existed. She walked into the blood bank. The nurse at the desk looked up, smiled. She knew Amara by now, back again, every month, like clockwork. Amara sat down in the donation chair the way most people sit down at a coffee shop, casual, routine. Like giving away a piece of yourself was just another Tuesday. The nurse tied the rubber band around Amara's arm and tapped for a vein. "You know," she said, while prepping the needle, "your blood type is something special, AB negative. Less than 1% of people have it. We're always short on it. Always. There's maybe a handful of regular donors in the whole city with your type, and most of them don't show up every month like you do." Amara watched the needle slide in, watched her blood dark and warm begin filling the bag. She didn't flinch. She never did. "Do you ever wonder who gets it?" the nurse asked. "Your blood, I mean? We can't tell you, obviously. Donor anonymity. Once it leaves here, it gets processed, typed, cross-matched, and sent wherever it's needed. You'll never know whose body it ends up in, and they'll never know it came from you." Amara shook her head. "I don't need to know. My mother used to say something back home. She said blood is the one thing rich and poor share equally. When you give it, you give life itself." She said that phrase the way some people say prayers. Not dramatic, not trying to be deep, just stating something she believed down to her bones. The nurse finished the draw, labeled the bag, placed it in the cooler alongside the others. Amara's blood would be tested, processed, and delivered to a patient within 48 hours. That was the system. Anonymous, efficient, invisible. One person gives. Another person receives. And neither one ever knows the other exists. Amara pressed the cotton ball against the inside of her elbow, held it there. She'd done this 7 times before today. 7 months of quiet giving. She didn't do it for recognition. Didn't do it for money. There was no money. Blood donation is free. You give it, they take it, and the only payment is a cookie and a small cup of orange juice that Amara always accepted because she'd learned a long time ago never to turn down free food. She sat in the recovery chair for the required 15 minutes, drank her juice, ate her cookie, and then she stood up, put her worn jacket back on, and walked out of the blood bank the same way she'd walked in, quietly, without anyone watching. She didn't know whose veins her blood would flow through. She didn't need to know. But if she had known, everything about her life would have been different. Stay with me, because the child receiving Amara's blood right now is someone whose name you will recognize. Amara worked the night shift at St. Jude Children's Memorial, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. sometimes 6 when she needed the overtime, which was most weeks. Her official title was Certified Nursing Assistant, CNA, the lowest rung on the hospital ladder. She made $15.40 an hour, after taxes that came to about $2.100 a month. In Chicago, where rent for a one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood costs more than that. Her job was simple, at least on paper. Change bed linens, empty bedpans, wipe down surfaces, take vital signs, help patients eat, help them to the bathroom, help them do the things that sickness stole from them. A CNA is the person who touches patients the most and gets paid the least. Doctors see patients for minutes. Nurses see them for segments of their shift. But CNAs live in those rooms. They are the ones who hear the crying at 3 a.m. The ones who hold a child's hand when the parents have gone home to sleep. The ones who notice when something changes in a patient's breathing before any monitor picks it up. And they are invisible. Not metaphorically, literally invisible. Doctors walked past Amara every single night, like she was furniture. Nurses gave her instructions without looking up from their charts. Patients' families sometimes spoke about her while she was standing right there, as if she couldn't hear them. She was background noise. A body that mopped and lifted and wiped so that the important people could do their important work. Her supervisor, Marcus Webb, made sure she knew her place. Marcus ran the night custodial and CNA operations with the energy of a man who believed efficiency was a religion and compassion was a waste of billable minutes. You're a CNA, Amara, not a therapist. Clean the room and move on. He'd said that to her 3 weeks ago when he caught her sitting with a 6-year-old who couldn't sleep. The child had been crying. Amara had been telling her a story about a bird that flew across the ocean. Marcus had written her up. You have 14 rooms to turn over tonight, he'd said, not looking at her. I don't care if the kid is crying. That's what nurses are for. You are here to clean. Do your job, or I'll find someone who will. Amara hadn't argued. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing with people who had power over your paycheck was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when her mother needed her. Denise Osei was 67 years old, and she was dying slowly. Chronic kidney disease, stage 4. She needed dialysis 3 times a week. Even with insurance, which Amara had barely managed to get through the hospital, the out-of-pocket costs were crushing. Co-pays, medications, transportation to the dialysis center, the special diet Denise needed but couldn't always afford. It added up to about $3,000 a month. Money Amara didn't have. Money she made anyway somehow by picking up every extra shift, by eating 1 meal a day, by wearing shoes until the soles came apart. She never told anyone at work about her mother, never complained, never asked for help. She just showed up, did her job, gave her blood once a month, and went home. Every morning, at 7:30, Amara walked out of the hospital and headed for the bus stop 2 blocks east. And every morning she passed the same billboard on Michigan Avenue, a massive ad for a company called Medicore AI. The tagline read, "Saving children's lives with the power of AI." Beneath it, a smiling child. Beneath that, a logo worth billions. Amara walked past that billboard every single day without a second glance. She didn't know who owned Medicore AI. She didn't know that the company's founder had a son in the very hospital she'd just left. And she certainly didn't know that the child on the 7th floor, the one hooked up to blood transfusion bags once a month, was alive because of what flowed out of her veins every 30 days. She'd just walked, head down, jacket pulled tight. Another invisible woman heading home in a city that had never once asked her name. 3 floors above where Amara gave her blood every month, a different world existed. A world that smelled like fresh flowers instead of disinfectant. A world where the hospital rooms had leather recliners and imported Italian linen and a view of Lake Michigan that most Chicagoans would never see from that angle. This was the VIP pediatric wing. And in room 714, a 4-year-old boy named Elijah Fairfax was watching cartoons at 2 inches the afternoon while a bag of dark red blood dripped slowly into his tiny arm. His father sat beside him. Julian Fairfax, 46 years old, founder and CEO of Motivational AI, a company valued at $4.2 billion that used artificial intelligence to diagnose rare diseases in children across 47 countries. Julian's face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. He'd spoken at Davos. He'd shaken hands with 3 different presidents. His technology had identified early-stage leukemia in over 1,2,000 children who would have otherwise been diagnosed too late, and his own son was dying. Elijah had autoimmune hemolytic anemia, AIHA, a condition where the body turns against itself. The immune system, which is supposed to protect you, starts attacking your own red blood cells, destroying them, eating them alive from the inside. Without regular blood transfusions, Elijah's body couldn't carry enough oxygen. His organs would start to fail, slowly at first, then all at once. The transfusions were the only thing keeping him alive. 1 bag of AB-negative blood every month, matched to his exact type. Without it, his hemoglobin would drop to dangerous levels within weeks. Julian watched the blood drip, watched it enter his son's arm, watched the color slowly return to Elijah's face, and he felt the same thing he felt every single month in this room: rage. Not at anyone, not at anything he could fight. Just rage at the universe for giving him the power to save other people's children but not his own. Dr. Lorraine Mbeki walked in. She was the head of pediatric hematology. South African. Brilliant. Calm in the way that only doctors who've seen the worst can be calm. "How's he responding today?" Julian asked, without looking away from the IV drip. "Well, his numbers should stabilize within 24 hours, the same as last month." Dr. Mbeki checked the monitors, adjusted a setting, made a note in her chart. Julian leaned forward. "How is it possible that I can fund a company that diagnoses diseases in 47 countries, but I can't find a reliable blood donor for my own son?" Dr. Mbeki looked at him. "Not with pity, with patience. Because blood doesn't care about net worth, Mr. Fairfax. It only cares about compatibility. AB negative is the rarest type. Less than 1% of the population. We can't manufacture it. We can't synthesize it. And we can't force people to donate it. All we can do is hope that the right person shows up." Julian stared at the blood bag. Someone else's blood. A stranger's blood. The only thing between his son and a slow death. And he didn't even know who it belonged to. "Who donates this?" he asked. "Is it the same person every time, Dr.?" Mbeki paused. "Donor information is confidential, Mr. Fairfax. You know that. The blood bank operates on strict anonymity. It protects the donor from outside pressure, and it protects the integrity of the system. I'm not asking to pressure anyone. I want to thank them. I want to make sure they keep coming back. I want to know that my son's life doesn't depend on some anonymous stranger deciding to skip a month." Dr. Mbeki set down her chart. "I understand your concern. And I can tell you this much, not as his doctor, but as someone who has access to the donation records. Your son's primary donor has been consistent for over 18 months, the same person. Every month, without fail, without being asked, without knowing whose blood they're giving or why." Julian's jaw tightened. 18 months. Someone had been saving his son's life for a year and a half, and he didn't even know their name, didn't know if they were a man or a woman, didn't know if they were rich or poor, or young or old, didn't know anything. "And I can't know who they are, no. You cannot." Dr. Mbeki turned back to her computer. On the screen, a file, a donor profile, a name she recognized because she saw it every month when the blood bank processed the donation. She looked at the name, then she closed the file. "She'll be back next month. She always comes back." Julian didn't catch the pronoun. He didn't notice that Dr. Mbeki had just slipped. He was too focused on his son, too focused on the blood bag, too focused on the terrible, humbling reality that all his money, all his technology, all his power could not do what one anonymous stranger was doing for free. If you're already invested in this story, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what's about to happen between Amara and the boy in room 714 will break your heart in the best way possible. It was a Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. The 7th floor was quiet, the way hospitals get quiet after midnight. Not silent. Never silent. There's always the hum of machines, the soft beep of monitors, the distant sound of someone's TV left on too low to hear the words, but loud enough to know it's there. Amara pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway. Room by room, wipe, mop, check the trash. Restock the hand sanitizer. Move on. She'd done this 1,000 times. She could do it with her eyes closed. Room 714 was next on her list. The VIP room. She knocked softly. No answer. She pushed the door open. The room was dark except for the blue glow of the heart monitor and a small nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. In the bed, a small boy sat upright against 2 pillows, wide awake, eyes big and dark and frightened. "Hey there," Amara kept her voice low. "You okay, sweetheart?" The boy looked at her, studied her face. He was tiny for 4, thin in the way sick children are thin. Not from hunger, but from the disease that was slowly stealing his body's ability to make the blood it needed. "I can't sleep," he whispered. "It's too dark, and the beeping is scary." Amara looked at the door. She had 13 more rooms to clean tonight. Marcus would check her progress at 1 a.m. She was already behind schedule. She should have moved on. Instead, she parked her cart in the hallway, walked back into the room, and sat down in the chair next to his bed. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elijah." "Well, Elijah, I'm Amara, and I'll tell you what, how about I stay for a few minutes, just until you feel sleepy? Would that be okay?" He nodded, small, grateful. Amara told him about the ocean in Ghana, about how the waves sound different there than they do in Lake Michigan, about the fishermen who go out before sunrise and come back with nets full of silver, about her grandmother who used to say, "The ocean remembers every person who's ever been kind to it." Elijah listened. His eyes got heavy. But before he fell asleep, he reached under his pillow and pulled out a piece of paper, a drawing. Crayon on printer paper, the kind of art only a 4-year-old can make. "This is the blood lady," he said, holding it up for Amara to see. She looked at it, a stick figure, brown skin, big hands, holding a red heart. "The blood lady?" Amara asked. "She comes every month." Elijah pointed to the IV pole next to his bed where the empty blood bag from his last transfusion still hung. "I don't know who she is, but my daddy says someone gives me their blood so I can be strong. I call her the blood lady. She makes me feel better." Amara felt something shift in her chest, something warm, something painful. "Do you think the blood lady knows she's saving me?" Elijah asked, his voice getting softer as sleep pulled him closer. Amara looked at this child. This tiny, brave boy with his crayon drawings and his rocket ship nightlight, and his body that was fighting a war it couldn't win alone. "I'm sure she does, sweetheart, and I'm sure she's happy to do it." Elijah smiled, closed his eyes. Within a minute he was asleep. Amara sat there for a moment longer, looking at the drawing, looking at the empty blood bag. She didn't connect them. How could she? She had no reason to. She was just a CNA who cleaned rooms and gave blood separately in different parts of the same building, never knowing that those 2 acts were part of the same story. She tucked the blanket around Elijah's shoulders, set the drawing on his bedside table, and quietly pushed her cart back into the hallway. Amara had no idea that the child she was tucking in was the same child she'd been saving for 19 months. And she had no idea that in 5 months the truth would come out in the worst possible way. Amara Osei came to America when she was 17 years old. She came with a full scholarship to study pre-med at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She came with a suitcase that weighed more than she did 2 textbooks she'd already read cover to cover, and a dream so big it barely fit inside her chest. She was going to be a doctor. Back in Accra, that dream had been everything. Her mother, Denise, had worked 3 jobs to get Amara through secondary school, sold fabric at the market in the morning, cleaned offices in the afternoon, took in laundry at night, all so her daughter could study, all so her daughter could become the thing Denise never had a chance to be. The day Amara got her scholarship letter, Denise held it with both hands and cried. Not sad tears, the kind of tears that come when something you've been praying for your whole life finally shows up on paper. You are going to heal people, Denise had told her. That is what you were made to do. And Amara believed it. She believed it through her first year of college when the coursework was brutal and the loneliness was worse. She believed it through her second year when she made the dean's list. Both semesters and her organic chemistry professor told her she had the best hands in the lab. She believed it through the first half of her third year when she started clinical rotations and felt for the first time like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Then her mother called. Denise's kidneys were failing. Both of them. Stage 3 chronic kidney disease, moving fast towards stage 4. She needed dialysis. She needed medication. She needed treatment that cost more money than she'd made in a decade. Amara had done the math. She'd done it over and over, sitting on the floor of her dorm room at 2 inches the morning with a calculator and a stack of bills. Dialysis in the United States costs an average of $90,000 a year. Insurance covers some of it if you have insurance, which Denise didn't. Not yet. Medicare kicks in for kidney patients, but there's a waiting period. There are copays. There are medications that cost $400 a bottle. There are transportation costs and dietary requirements, and the 1,000 small expenses that pile up around a chronic illness like snow around a buried car. Amara couldn't afford tuition and her mother's treatment. She could afford one, not both. And that was never really a choice at all. She dropped out at the end of her junior year, 3 semesters away from finishing, 3 semesters away from medical school applications, 3 semesters away from becoming Dr. Amara Osei. Instead, she became a CNA, because it was the fastest certification she could get, because hospitals were always hiring, because the pay was enough to cover Denise's co-pays if Amara never spent money on anything else, and because it kept her inside a hospital, even if she wasn't a doctor, even if she'd never be one now. She was still there, still in the building where healing happened, still close enough to touch it even if she couldn't practice it. Some people would have been bitter. Some people would have spent every shift mourning the career they lost. Amara didn't. Not because she didn't feel the loss. She felt it every single day. She felt it every time a doctor gave an order she could have given. Every time she changed a bedpan knowing she could have read the chart instead. Every time she stood in an elevator next to residents who were younger than her wearing white coats she should have been wearing. But her mother had taught her something a long time ago that kept the bitterness from taking root. When Amara was 14, Denise had taken her to a blood drive at the community center in Accra. It was Amara's first time donating. She was nervous, scared of the needle, scared of the blood. Denise had held her hand and said something Amara would carry with her for the rest of her life. Blood is the one thing rich and poor share equally. When you give it, you give life itself. Amara had been donating ever since. In Accra, in Chicago, in every city she'd ever passed through. Not because anyone asked, not because she got paid, but because she had AB negative blood and she knew what that meant. It meant she was rare. It meant her blood was always needed. And it meant that every time she sat in that chair and opened her vein, someone somewhere would live who might not have lived otherwise. She didn't know who. She didn't need to know. That was the point. Giving wasn't about recognition. It was about responsibility. If you had something rare, something life-saving, something that cost you nothing but an hour and a little dizziness, then keeping it to yourself wasn't just selfish. It was wrong. Her mother had taught her that. And Amara believed it the way she believed in breathing. So she worked her shifts. She cleaned her rooms. She held children's hands in the dark. She paid her mother's medical bills. And once a month she gave her blood away for free to strangers she would never meet. Amara had given up medical school, but she'd never given up medicine. She practiced it every night in every room she cleaned, with every patient she comforted, and every month with every pint of blood she gave away for free. This story is about to take a turn that will change everything. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. It was a Thursday, 3:47 p.m., and on the 7th floor of St. Jude Children's Memorial. Something was going very wrong. Elijah Fairfax had been fine that morning. He'd eaten breakfast. He'd drawn pictures. He'd asked his father when he could go home the same question he asked every day, and Julian had given the same answer he always gave. Soon, buddy. Soon. But by noon, Elijah's skin had turned the color of old paper. His eyes, usually bright and restless, had gone dull. His breathing was shallow, fast, wrong. Dr. Mbeki was paged at 115. By 130 she was in the room reading his blood panel, and her face told Julian everything he needed to know before she said a single word. "He's in hemolytic crisis, doctor," Mbeki said. "His body is destroying red blood cells faster than we've ever seen. His hemoglobin is at 5.2 and dropping." "What does that mean?" Julian asked, even though some part of him already knew. "It means his organs are not getting enough oxygen. If we don't get his hemoglobin up within the next 6 hours, we're looking at organ failure, starting with his kidneys, then his heart." Julian gripped the bed rail. His knuckles went white. "Then transfuse him. Do it now. We don't have the blood, Mr. Fairfax." Those 5 words landed like a physical blow. "What do you mean you don't have the blood?" AB negative is the rarest blood type in the country. Less than 1% of Americans carry it. The national blood supply is critically low right now, especially for rare types. We've contacted every regional blood bank within 200 miles. Nobody has AB negative in stock. Nobody. Julian stared at her. "This is a $400 million hospital. You're telling me you can't find a bag of blood?" "I'm telling you that money cannot create blood that doesn't exist," Dr. Mbeki said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "We have exactly 0 units of AB negative on hand. The only reliable donor we've had for the past 2 years." She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. What Julian pressed. "The only donor." What Dr. Mbeki looked at him, looked at Elijah, looked at the monitor that showed his son's hemoglobin dropping in real time. "I'll make some calls," she said quietly, and left the room. What Dr. Mbeki almost said would have changed everything, but she held her tongue, and that silence nearly cost Elijah his life. It was 9:42 p.m. when Amara heard about it. She was on the 3rd floor, restocking supply closets, when 2 nurses came around the corner, talking in the urgent, clipped tones that hospital staff use when something is going badly. "Pediatric VIP on 7, 4-year-old in hemolytic crisis. They need AB negative and nobody has it. They've been calling blood banks all day. Nothing." The other nurse shook her head. "That poor kid. If they don't find a match by midnight, they're talking about emergency exchange transfusion. And even that's a long shot without the right type." They turned the corner and were gone. They hadn't noticed Amara standing there with an armful of bedsheets. "AB negative." Amara set the sheets down slowly. Her heart was beating in a way it hadn't beaten in a long time. Not fast, not panicked, but loud, deep. The way it beat when she knew something with absolute certainty. She had AB negative blood. She'd donated 3 weeks ago. The guidelines say you need to wait at least 8 weeks between donations, 56 days. She was at 21. Donating now would be early. Too early. Her iron levels might not have recovered. She could get dizzy. She could faint. In rare cases, donating too frequently can cause serious anemia, the kind that puts the donor in a hospital bed. Amara knew all of this. She'd been donating long enough to know the rules by heart. She also knew that somewhere above her, a child was dying, because nobody in this entire city had what she had. She walked to the blood bank, pushed open the door. The same nurse who always drew her blood looked up surprised. "Amara, you're not due for another 5 weeks." "I know. I'm here because I heard you need AB negative." "I have it. Take mine." The nurse shook her head. "I can't. You donated 3 weeks ago. Your hemoglobin might not be high enough. If I draw you now and your levels crash, I'm putting you at risk. There are protocols." "I know the rules," Amara said, and her voice was calm, steady. The voice of a woman who had made her decision before she walked through the door. "I also know that somewhere in this hospital a child is dying because nobody has what I have. So take my blood. I'll deal with the consequences. The nurse hesitated, looked at her screen, looked at Amara. Then she paged Dr. Mbeki. Dr. Mbeki arrived 4 minutes later. She looked at Amara, and something shifted behind her eyes. Something heavy, something she couldn't say. Because Dr. Mbeki knew. She knew exactly where this blood was going. She knew the name of the child. She knew the name of the father. And she knew that the woman standing in front of her in faded scrubs and worn shoes, offering her own blood at the cost of her own health, had been keeping that child alive for nearly 2 years without ever being told. She wanted to say it. She wanted to tell Amara everything. She wanted to say, "The boy you're saving is the same boy you told bedtime stories to last Tuesday? The same boy who drew you a picture and called you the story lady. His father is worth $4.2 billion, and he has no idea you exist." But the rules existed for a reason. Donor anonymity protected people like Amara from being pressured, manipulated, or exploited. And Dr. Mbeki had sworn an oath to uphold those rules, even when every cell in her body screamed at her to break them. "You understand the risks, Dr. Mbeki asked. "I understand them. And you want to proceed, I need to proceed. There's a difference." Dr. Mbeki looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, drew her a chair. The needle went in. Amara's blood, dark and warm and full of the antibodies that matched only one tiny boy 3 floors above her, began filling the bag. She closed her eyes, felt the familiar pull. The slight lightheadedness that always came when she gave too soon, too much, too often. She didn't care. Her mother's words moved through her like a heartbeat. Blood is the one thing rich and poor share equally. When you give it, you give life itself. 3 floors below room 714, Amara sat in a donation chair with her eyes closed and her arm extended, giving away the thing her body needed most. 3 floors above her, the blood bank called up to pediatrics. 1 unit of AB negative, fresh, available, ready. Dr. Mbeki carried the bag herself. She didn't trust a courier with this one. She walked it up the stairs because the elevator was too slow. She walked into room 714, where Julian Fairfax sat beside his son, holding the boy's small hand, his face gray with the kind of fear that money cannot fix. She hung the bag, connected the line, started the drip. Julian watched the blood enter his son's arm. Dark red, warm, somebody else's life flowing into his child. He didn't know whose. He just watched. Elijah's breathing slowed first. Not in a bad way. In the way that happens when a body finally gets what it needs. His color started to shift, the waxy gray fading to something warmer, something alive. His fingers, which had been cold to the touch for hours, began to warm. Julian pressed his forehead against his son's hand. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The relief was so enormous, it had taken his language away. 3 floors below, Amara was lying in the recovery chair. The room was spinning slightly. Her arms felt heavy. The nurse had given her juice and crackers and strict instructions not to move for 30 minutes. She was dizzy, tired. Her body was telling her she'd given too much too soon. She lay there in the quiet of the blood bank, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigeration units that held the donations. She didn't know that her blood was at that very moment pulling a 4-year-old boy back from the edge. She didn't know that the boy's father was crying 3 floors above her head. She didn't know that the drawing of the blood lady was sitting on Elijah's bedside table right next to the IV pole that held the bag with her name on it. She didn't know any of it. She just lay there, dizzy and tired, and quietly certain that she'd done the right thing. 2 people in the same building, connected by blood, separated by 3 floors, and a wall of anonymity that was about to crack. The next morning, Julian Fairfax was in Dr. Mbeki's office before she'd even finished her coffee. "I need to know who the donor is." He said it like a man who was used to getting answers, like a man who signed checks that built hospital wings, like a man who had never been told no by anyone who wanted to keep their funding. "Doctor." Mbeki set her cup down. She didn't flinch. "You know I can't do that, Mr. Fairfax. My son almost died last night. He almost died because we ran out of blood. And you're telling me there's one person, one single person in this entire city who has been keeping him alive for 2 years, and I'm not allowed to know their name. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Julian stood up, paced to the window, paced back. He was a man who solved problems for a living, who built systems, who fixed things. And right now, the thing he needed to fix was the gap between his son's survival and a name he wasn't allowed to hear. There are laws around this, Dr. Mbeki continued. Donor anonymity isn't a suggestion. It's a federal protection. It exists because without it, donors get pressured, they get harassed, they get guilt-tripped into giving more than their bodies can safely handle. The system works because donors trust that their privacy will be respected. If we break that trust, donors stop coming. And if donors stop coming, children like Elijah die. Julian turned to face her. I'm not going to pressure anyone. I want to thank them. I want to make sure they're taken care of. I want to guarantee that my son has a reliable source of blood going forward. And I understand that, Dr. Mbeki said. But what you want doesn't override what they're entitled to. This person chose to donate anonymously. That means they chose not to be found. And respecting that choice is not optional, not for you, not for me, not for anyone. Julian's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, turned the screen toward Dr. Mbeki. $5 million. Right now, transferred to this hospital's general fund. All I need is a name. Dr. Mbeki looked at the screen, looked at the number. Then she looked at Julian with an expression that made something shift inside his chest. And if I sell that name for $5 million, what does that make me? What does that make this hospital? A place where privacy is for sale, where the wealthy can buy access to anyone's personal information as long as the check clears. She stood up. Mr. Fairfax, I am deeply sympathetic to what you're going through. Your son is my patient and I care about him, but I will not sell a donor's identity. Not for $5 million, not for $50 million. The day this hospital puts a price tag on someone's right to privacy is the day we stop being a hospital and start being a marketplace. Julian put his phone away. His hands were shaking, not from anger, from something worse, from the realization that for the first time in his adult life, there was something his money genuinely could not buy. He left without another word. Julian couldn't buy the answer. But he was about to stumble into it in a way that would shatter every assumption he'd ever made about who saves lives and who deserves to be saved. The same week Julian was trying to buy a name, Amara was sitting in a different doctor's office, getting news that would break her. Her mother's nephrologist was a kind man with tired eyes who delivered bad news the way all good doctors do, gently, but without false hope. Denise's kidneys were done. Both of them. Stage 5. End-stage renal disease. Dialysis was no longer enough. She needed a transplant. Without one, the doctor said she had maybe 6 months, maybe less. Amara sat in the plastic chair and listened and didn't cry. Not yet. She saved that for later. The numbers hit her like a wall. A kidney transplant costs between $250,000 and $400,000. Insurance would cover a portion, but Denise's coverage had gaps, big ones. After everything was calculated, co-pays, medications, post-surgical care, rehabilitation, Amara was looking at roughly $120,000 out of pocket. She made $15.40 an hour. She had $2.300 savings. She didn't have a credit card. She didn't own property. She had nothing to borrow against and no one to borrow from. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a calculator and a legal pad and tried to make the math work. She could pick up more shifts. She could work 7 days a week. She could stop eating lunch. She could sell the car she didn't have. She could do all of those things and still not have enough. And then another thought crept in. A quieter one. A colder one. She could stop donating blood. Not permanently, just for now. Her body was still recovering from the early donation. She'd been tired for weeks, dizzy sometimes. Her iron was low. The blood bank nurse had told her to take it easy, eat more red meat, wait the full 8 weeks before coming back. If she kept pushing herself, kept donating, on top of working double shifts, her own health would collapse. And if she collapsed, there would be nobody to take care of Denise. But if she stopped donating, somewhere in this hospital, a child with AB negative blood would have one less option, one less chance, one less month of guaranteed survival. She was choosing between her mother's life and a stranger's child. Amara drove to the dialysis center the next morning. Denise was in her chair, hooked up to the machine that cleaned her blood 3 times a week because her kidneys no longer could. She looked smaller than she had last month. Thinner, more fragile. Amara told her about the transplant, about the cost, about the impossible math. She did not tell her mother about the blood, but Denise knew. Mothers always know. "You're thinking about stopping, aren't you?" Amara looked away. "Mama, I need to focus on you right now. Don't you dare stop giving blood because of me, Amara." Denise's voice was weak, but the words had iron in them. "The day you stop giving is the day you stop being who you are." "But Mama, I can't lose you." "You won't lose me." Denise reached out and took Amara's hand. Her grip was fragile, but her eyes were fierce. "But don't save me by letting someone else's child die. That is not who I raised. That is not who you are." Amara held her mother's hand, held it tight, and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be a lie. That night, at 3 a.m., Amara sat in her car in the hospital parking lot. The engine was off. The windows were fogged. She'd just finished a 1-2-hour shift, and she was so tired, her bones ached. She cried. Not the pretty kind of crying, the ugly kind. The kind where your whole body shakes and you can't breathe, and you press your face into the steering wheel, and you make sounds that don't belong in a language. She cried because she was broke, and her mother was dying, and she was exhausted, and nobody in the world knew her name. She cried because she'd given away her blood 24 times and never once been thanked. And she didn't want to be thanked. But she also didn't want to be invisible anymore. And she hated herself for wanting that, because wanting recognition for kindness felt like it made the kindness less real. She cried in the dark, in an empty parking lot, at 3 inches the morning, and nobody saw her. Nobody ever saw her. It was 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday when Julian Fairfax's world broke open. He'd come to the hospital unannounced, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about the hemolytic crisis, couldn't stop hearing Dr. Mbecky's voice saying, "We don't have the blood." So he'd driven to St. Jude in the middle of the night to sit with Elijah, to watch him breathe, to count the rises and falls of his small chest, and convince himself his son was still alive. He was walking from the elevator toward the VIP wing when he passed the blood bank. The door was ajar, the hallway was empty, and 2 nurses inside were talking. He wouldn't have stopped. He wouldn't have listened. But one of them said a name that caught his ear. "Amara's back again. 3rd time this month she's come in to check on the schedule. Wants to make sure she's set for her next donation." The other nurse laughed softly. "That woman is something else. She's the only AB negative regular we've got. Has been for 2 years now. Shows up like clockwork. Never misses. Even came in early last month when we had that emergency." Julian stopped walking. "She's the reason that Fairfax kid is still here, you know. Would have died 3 times over without her. 24 donations in 24 months, all anonymous. She's never once asked who it goes to." Julian stood in that hallway like a man who'd been hit by something he couldn't see. His feet wouldn't move. His heart was beating so loud he was sure the nurses could hear it. Amara, AB negative, 24 donations. The Fairfax kid, his son, his son's blood, his son's life, a woman named Amara, a CNA. Julian's mind started racing. He knew that name, not personally, not the way you know someone you've spoken to, but the way you know a word you've seen 100 times without reading it. Amara, the name on a badge he'd glanced at and forgotten, the face he'd passed in hallways without registering, the woman with the cleaning cart who was always there and never visible. He walked away from the blood bank. Slowly, quietly, his hands were trembling. He turned a corner, then another, following the sound of machinery. the distant squeak of wheels on tile, until he reached the third-floor east corridor. And there she was. Amara was on her knees, on the floor, cleaning. A patient in room 312 had had a nosebleed, a bad one, and there was blood on the linoleum, and Amara was on her hands and knees scrubbing it out with a rag and a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. Julian stood at the end of the hallway and watched her. He watched her hands, the blue nitrile gloves stretched tight over fingers that were already cracked beneath them, her knees on the wet floor, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her scrubs faded from navy to something that didn't have a color anymore. She was focused entirely on the stain, moving methodically, carefully, the way someone works when they take pride in even the smallest task. She didn't know he was there. And Julian realized, standing in that empty hallway at midnight, that he had walked past this woman hundreds of times. Hundreds. He'd walked past her in the lobby, in the elevator, in the hallway outside his son's room. He'd looked through her the way you look through glass. She was background, she was furniture, she was nobody, and she was the reason his son was alive. He thought about what he'd said to Dr. Mbeki. "I'll donate $5 million, $5 million for a name." And here was the name. Here was the person, on her knees, scrubbing blood off a hospital floor for $15 an hour. And she'd been giving away her own blood for free every month for 2 years to keep his child breathing. Julian Fairfax had built a company worth $4.2 billion on the promise of saving children's lives. His face had been on magazine covers. He'd been called a visionary, a disruptor, a genius. And his son was alive because of a woman he'd never bothered to see. He stood there for a long time. He didn't speak. He didn't approach her. He didn't do anything except stand there and watch and feel something open up inside his chest that he didn't have a word for. Something between shame and gratitude and awe, and the terrible, humbling realization that the most important person in his son's life had been invisible to him for 2 years. Then he turned around and he walked away. It wasn't the right time. He didn't have the right words. He didn't know what to say or how to say it, or whether anything he could say would be enough. But everything had changed. Everything. Julian Fairfax knew the truth now. But knowing the truth and knowing what to do with it are very different things. And what he chose to do next would test whether gratitude from a billionaire is a gift or a trap. Julian didn't sleep that night. He went home to his penthouse overlooking the lake and sat in the dark and thought about a woman on her knees. The next morning, he called Dr. Mbeki. His voice was different this time. Quieter. Stripped of the urgency and the entitlement that had defined their last conversation. "I know who the donor is." Silence on the other end. "I didn't hack anything. I didn't bribe anyone. I overheard 2 nurses talking. They didn't know I was there. Her name is Amara. She's a CNA in your hospital. Dr. Mbeki exhaled slowly. "Mr. Fairfax, I need you to understand something. She doesn't know. She doesn't know it's your son. She doesn't know whose blood she's been giving. She comes in every month and donates and goes back to work and never asks a single question." "I know," Julian said. "I watched her last night. She was cleaning a floor." There was a long pause. Then Dr. Mbeki spoke, and her voice carried a weight Julian hadn't heard before. "There are things you should know about her. Things I can share because they're not medical records and because frankly you need to understand who this woman is before you decide what to do next," she told him. Not the medical details, not the donor file, but the things anyone at the hospital could have told him if he'd ever bothered to ask. That Amara had been a pre-med student, that she'd dropped out in her 3rd year to pay for her mother's kidney treatment, that her mother was now in stage 5 renal failure and needed a transplant, that Amara worked double shifts to cover the dialysis copays, that she'd been donating blood since she was a teenager, that she'd donated early during the crisis against medical advice at risk to her own health because she heard there was a child who needed AB negative and she couldn't walk past that need without stopping. She didn't know it was Elijah, Dr. Mbeki said quietly. She just heard a child was in trouble. That's all she needed to hear. Julian sat in his office chair, a chair that cost $4,000, in a room with a view of the Chicago skyline, in a building that bore his name on the lobby wall, and he thought about a woman who earned less in a year than his chair cost, a woman who had given up her dream of being a doctor to save her mother, a woman who gave away her blood every month even though it made her sick, a woman who cleaned the floors of the hospital where his son slept and never once mentioned that she was the reason that child was alive. He thought about his company, Medicore AI, saving children's lives with the power of AI. It was printed on business cards. It was on billboards. It was the tagline of a $4.2 billion empire built on the idea that technology could solve the problems of human health. But his son's health hadn't been solved by technology. His son's health had been maintained by a human being with a needle in her arm and a belief that you don't get to walk past someone who's dying if you have the power to help. Julian Fairfax had built a $4.2 billion empire on the idea that technology saves lives. But his son was alive because of a woman who earned $15 an hour and gave away her blood for free. It was 6-7 inches the morning, Chicago in November, the kind of cold that finds the gaps in your clothing and settles into your bones. The sky was still dark. The parking lot lights cast long yellow pools on the asphalt. Amara walked out of the hospital the same way she always did. Head down, thin jacket pulled tight, bag over one shoulder, moving fast because the bus came at 6:20, and if she missed it, she'd have to wait 40 minutes for the next one. She didn't see the man leaning against the black car near the east exit. She wouldn't have recognized him if she had. Julian Fairfax was not someone whose face she'd ever had reason to learn. "Excuse me." Amara stopped, turned, looked at the man. Expensive coat, tired eyes, hands in his pockets. He didn't look dangerous. He looked lost. "Can I help you? Are you Amara? Amara Osei?" She felt something tighten in her chest. When strangers know your full name, it's rarely good news. "Yes." "Who are you?" Julian didn't answer the question. "Not yet." Instead, he asked one. "Why do you do it?" Amara blinked. "Do what? Donate blood, every month, for 2 years. Why?" The tightness in her chest turned to ice. "How do you know about that, please?" Julian's voice was quiet, almost careful, like a man handling something fragile. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to understand. Why do you do it?" Amara studied his face. She was good at reading people. You learn that when you spend your nights caring for children who can't tell you what hurts. This man was not threatening. He was something else. He was barely holding himself together. "Because I can," she said simply. "I have a rare blood type, AB negative. There aren't many of us, and people die when the supply runs out. So I show up. That's all." "That's all?" Julian repeated. "That's all?" He was quiet for a moment. Steam from his breath rose and disappeared. "My name is Julian Fairfax. I have a son named Elijah. He's 4 years old. He's been a patient at this hospital for over 2 years. He has a condition that destroys his red blood cells. Without regular transfusions, he dies. And the only blood type that matches his is AB negative." Amara felt the ground shift under her feet. Not physically, but something inside her moved. Something she couldn't name yet. "For 24 months, Julian continued, one person has been keeping my son alive. One donor, the same person, every single month, anonymous, consistent, never missed once. The hospital wouldn't tell me who. They couldn't. Donor confidentiality." He looked at her. "It's you, Amara. You're the one." The parking lot was very quiet. A car passed on the street. Somewhere a bird called out in the dark. Amara stood perfectly still. "Your son?" she said. "What room is he in 714? 7th floor. VIP wing. The room with the rocket ship nightlight." She felt something crack open inside her chest. Not break, crack open. The way a seed cracks when something inside it starts to grow. "Elijah," she whispered. "You know him. I clean his room." "On the night shift." He can't sleep sometimes. I tell him stories." Julian's face changed. Something behind his eyes collapsed. "He talks about a blood lady," Amara said, and her voice was shaking now. "He calls the blood bag the blood lady. He drew me a picture once. A stick figure with brown skin and big hands holding a red heart. He said the blood lady comes every month and makes him feel better." She looked at Julian. Her eyes were wet. "The blood lady. That's me. I'm the blood lady." Julian nodded. He couldn't speak. Amara pressed her hand against her mouth. She stood there in a hospital parking lot at 6 inches the morning in a thin jacket in the freezing cold and felt 24 months of anonymous giving suddenly become real. Not a bag of blood in a cooler. Not a number in a database. A child. A specific child. A boy with dark eyes and a rocket ship nightlight who couldn't sleep in the dark and called her the story lady and drew pictures of someone he'd never met who kept him alive. And that someone was her. Had always been her. "I didn't save your son, Mr. Fairfax." Amara said it through tears. "I just gave blood. Anyone with AB negative could have done the same. But they didn't." Julian's voice broke. "For 24 months, nobody else showed up. Only you." He stepped forward. And then Julian Fairfax, a man worth $4.2 billion, a man whose name was on buildings and magazine covers and the sides of hospital wings, did something that shocked Amara into silence. He knelt down, right there, on the cold asphalt, in his expensive coat, on his knees. But he didn't kneel to say thank you. "I walked past you," he said. His voice was raw. 100 times. "I walked past you in the hallway, in the elevator, outside, my son's room. 100 times, and I never saw you. I never once looked at your face. I never once asked your name. You were saving my son's life, and I didn't even know you existed." "Please stand up," Amara said. "Sir, please." "I'm sorry," Julian said. And he meant it in a way that went deeper than Elijah. He was sorry for every invisible person he'd ever walked past, every CNA whose name he'd never learned, every cleaner whose cart he'd stepped around without a glance. He was sorry for 46 years of not seeing. Amara reached down and took his arm, gently. The way she'd lift a patient, the way she'd comfort a child. She helped him stand. They stood there, 2 people from different worlds in a parking lot, in the cold, at 6 inches the morning, both crying, neither speaking. Because sometimes there are no words big enough for what passes between people when one of them finally sees the other for the first time. Julian collected himself first, wiped his face, cleared his throat, and started talking in the way men like him talk when they want to fix things. "I want to help you. I want to pay for your mother's transplant. I want to set up a fund. I want to get you back into medical school. Whatever you need, name it. I'll make it happen today." Amara looked at him, and for the first time in this conversation her eyes weren't sad. They were sharp. "No." Julian blinked. "No, I don't want your money, Mr. Fairfax." He stared at her. This was not a response he'd encountered before. In his world, everyone wanted something. Everyone had a price. Every problem could be solved with the right number of zeros. "I'm offering you everything you need," he said carefully. "Your mother's surgery, your education, a better life. And I'm saying no." Amara's voice was steady. "If I accept money for blood, it stops being a gift. It becomes a transaction. And my mother taught me that blood is sacred, not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Julian opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Then what do you want? Because I have to do something. I can't just walk away from this and pretend you're not the reason my son is alive." Amara was quiet for a moment. She looked at the hospital behind her, at the building she entered every night and left every morning, at the place where she mopped floors and changed sheets and held children's hands and was never once seen by the people who ran it. "You want to thank me," she said. "Then change how your hospital treats people like me. Not just me. Every CNA, every aide, every transporter. Every person who cleans up after your doctors and empties the trash and brings the meals and holds the hands and never gets a thank you, never gets a living wage, never gets seen." She met his eyes. "You built a company that saves children with technology. That's wonderful. But there are people in this building right now saving children with their bare hands for $15 an hour, and nobody knows their names. You want to do something? Start there. Julian stood in the cold, looking at a woman who had just turned down more money than she'd make in a lifetime. A woman who didn't want his gratitude. She wanted justice. Not for herself, for everyone like her. And for the first time in a very long time, Julian Fairfax felt small. Not in a bad way, in the way you feel small when you stand in front of something bigger than yourself and realize you have a lot of growing to do. Amara didn't want Julian's money. But what Julian did with her words would change a lot more than just one hospital. This is the moment everything comes full circle. If you're not subscribed yet, you're going to want to be here for what happens next. Julian brought Amara to the 7th floor the next afternoon. She'd changed out of her scrubs, put on the nicest clothes she owned, which was a sweater her mother had given her, and a pair of clean jeans. She felt out of place in the VIP wing. She always did, but today was different. Today she wasn't here to clean. Julian opened the door to room 714. Elijah was sitting up in bed, drawing. His color was good today. The last transfusion was holding. He looked up when the door opened, and his face lit up the way only a 4-year-old's face can light up. "Miss Amara, you're here in the daytime." He said it like it was the most remarkable thing in the world, because to him Amara existed only at night. She was the woman who appeared in the dark with a cleaning cart and stories about the ocean. "Hi, Elijah." Amara's voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "How are you feeling today, good?" "Better." The blood lady came again. She looked at the IV pole, at the empty bag, at the tubing that had carried her blood into this child's arm. "She always comes." Julian stepped forward. He crouched down next to his son's bed. "Buddy, I want to tell you something. You know how you always talk about the blood lady, the person who gives you blood every month." Elijah nodded. "She makes me strong." "That's right, she does." Julian looked at Amara, then back at his son. "Well, the blood lady is here. She's standing right there." Elijah looked at Amara, then at his father, and, quote, then at Amara again. A 4-year-old's mind works differently than an adult's. There's no filter between understanding and expression, no social calculation, no hesitation. Elijah looked at Amara, the woman who told him stories about fishermen and oceans, and at the empty blood bag, the invisible hero who kept him alive, and his eyes went wide. "You're the blood lady and the story lady. You're two people." Amara laughed, a short broken sound that was half laugh and half sob. "No, sweetheart. I'm just one person. I just do two things." Elijah stared at her with an expression of pure, unfiltered wonder, the kind of wonder that only exists before the world teaches you to be cynical. Then he opened his arms. Amara crossed the room and wrapped her arms around that small boy and held him the way she'd held her mother and the way her mother had held her, tight, present, like she was trying to pour everything she felt through her skin and into his. Julian stood behind them. He didn't make a sound, but his face was ruined, tears running freely, jaw tight, hands clenched at his sides, not because he was sad, because he was watching something sacred, and he knew it. Elijah pulled back, reached under his pillow, and pulled out a piece of paper, creased and worn from months of being slept on, and carried around and shown to every nurse who came into the room. The drawing. The blood lady, a stick figure with brown skin and big hands holding a red heart. He'd drawn Amara long before anyone knew who she was. A child had seen her before a billionaire ever did. "This is you," Elijah said, holding the drawing up to Amara. "I made it for you. I was saving it. Because I knew you'd come one day." Amara took the drawing, held it with both hands, looked at it through tears that wouldn't stop. A stick figure, crayon on printer paper, brown skin, big hands, a red heart. It was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given her. Julian Fairfax went home that night and couldn't sleep. Not because of worry this time, because of shame, and because of a sentence that kept playing in his head like a song he couldn't turn off. Change how your hospital treats people like me. He'd built a $4.2 billion company on the idea that systems matter more than individuals. That if you fix the system, you fix the problem. Amara had just told him the same thing in a parking lot in the cold for free, so he fixed the system. It took him 3 weeks. 3 weeks of meetings and phone calls and lawyers and accountants and conversations with the hospital board that ranged from polite to heated to somewhere just short of threats. But Julian Fairfax was very good at getting things done when he decided something needed to happen. The first thing he did was fund the Invisible Heroes Initiative, a program designed specifically for CNAs, patient care aides, transporters, housekeeping staff, and every other frontline hospital worker who touched patients daily and made less than $20 an hour. The program had 3 components: a $4 per hour across-the-board raise for all support staff at St. Jude Children's Memorial, a professional development fund that covered certification courses, continuing education, and skills training, and an annual recognition ceremony where frontline workers were nominated by patients and families for the care they'd provided. Here's something most people don't know. The United States is facing a critical shortage of CNAs. There are roughly 1.4 million nursing assistants in the country, and the field has one of the highest turnover rates of any profession. About 45% of CNAs leave their jobs within the first year, not because they don't care, because they can't afford to stay. The average CNA earns between $14 and $17 an hour. In cities like Chicago, that's poverty wages. You can work full-time as a CNA and still qualify for food stamps. You can wipe down patients and change bedpans and monitor vital signs and hold a dying person's hand at 3 inches in the morning and still not be able to afford your own health insurance. The problem isn't the workers. The problem is a system that treats them as disposable. Julian understood that now, in a way he hadn't before, because Amara hadn't asked him to fix her life. She'd asked him to fix the world she lived in. The second thing Julian did was create the Denise Osei Medical Scholarship, named after Amara's mother, funded with an initial endowment of $10 million. The scholarship was open to any frontline healthcare worker, CNA aide, transporter technician, anyone who worked in a hospital in a support role and wanted to pursue medical education. Full tuition, full stipend, no strings attached. Julian hadn't told Amara about the name. He'd chosen it without asking because some things you don't need permission to honor. The third thing he did was the biggest. He redirected a portion of Medicore AI's research budget toward building a national rare blood type registry, a digital platform that would connect rare blood donors with patients who needed them, real-time matching, automated alerts, a system that made sure no hospital would ever run out of AB negative or B negative or any other rare type because they didn't know who had it. The technology that had built Julian's empire was finally being used to solve the problem that had almost killed his son. The launch event was held in the main auditorium of St. Jude Children's Memorial on a Thursday afternoon in March. Julian stood at the podium in front of 400 people, doctors, nurses, board members, media, staff from every level of the hospital, and in the third row, Marcus Webb, sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He'd been told attendance was mandatory. He hadn't been told why. Julian adjusted the microphone. "I built a company to save children with technology," he began. "My face has been on magazine covers. I've been called a visionary. I've given speeches at conferences where people paid $5,000 a seat to hear me talk about innovation. And 6 months ago, my son almost died because this hospital didn't have a bag of blood." He paused. "My son is alive today because of a woman who works in this building. A woman who earns $15 an hour. A woman who mops floors and changes sheets and takes vital signs and cleans up after the rest of us. A woman who donated her blood every single month for 2 years, anonymously, without payment, without recognition, without ever knowing whose life she was saving. She did it because her mother taught her that giving blood is not charity, it's responsibility." He looked at Amara. She was sitting near the back. She hadn't wanted to come. Dr. Mbeki had convinced her. I walked past that woman 100 times, Julian continued. 100 times, and I never saw her. And I don't think I'm the only one. I think this hospital, like every hospital in this country, is full of people we walk past without seeing. People who hold the whole system together and get paid the least for it. People who are the first to touch a patient and the last to be thanked. He turned to Marcus Webb. Today that changes. Marcus sat very still. His face revealed nothing, but his crossed arms slowly fell to his sides. Julian announced the Invisible Heroes Initiative. He announced the Denise Osei Scholarship. He announced the Rare Blood Registry. And when he was done, the auditorium stood. Not for him, for the idea that the people who are seen the least might matter the most. Amara didn't stand. She sat in her chair in the back row and wept quietly. Not because she was being honored, because her mother's name was on a scholarship, because the words she'd spoken in a parking lot at 6 inches the morning had turned into something real, because for the first time in her life, someone with power had listened to someone without it. 1 year later, Amara walked into a lecture hall at the University of Illinois Chicago School of Medicine. She was 35 years old. She was carrying a backpack that still had a hospital ID clipped to the front pocket. She was wearing the same shoes she'd worn on the night shift because she hadn't had time to buy new ones. And she was surrounded by two-year-olds who had never mopped a floor, or drawn blood from their own arm, or sat with a dying child at 3 inches the morning. She sat down in the third row, opened her notebook, looked at the whiteboard where the professor had written the first lesson of the semester. It felt like a dream. The kind you don't believe even while you're living it. The Denise Osei Scholarship covered everything. Tuition, books, a monthly stipend. Amara had applied without knowing who funded it. The letter had come from the hospital's education office formal official, no mention of Julian Fairfax. She'd read it 3 times before she believed it. And there was something else. Her mother was alive. Denise had received a kidney transplant 4 months ago. The donor was anonymous. The costs had been covered through a hospital charity fund that Amara had never heard of before. Dr. Becky had helped coordinate the paperwork. Everything had been clean, official, no strings, no names. Amara suspected. She couldn't prove it, but she knew how anonymity worked better than most. She'd spent 2 years giving anonymously, and now for the first time she was on the other side of that wall, receiving without knowing, grateful without a name to direct the gratitude toward. The symmetry was not lost on her. She sat in that lecture hall surrounded by students, young enough to be the children she'd cared for, and she looked at her hands. The same hands, the ones that had scrubbed hospital floors, the ones that had held the arms of sick children in the dark, the ones that had opened their veins 24 times so a stranger's blood could keep a small boy alive. Those hands were holding a medical textbook now. The same hands, different purpose, same person. Her mother's voice moved through her quiet and steady the way it always did when Amara needed to remember who she was. Blood is the one thing rich and poor share equally. When you give it, you give life itself. Amara picked up her pen, and she began to write. 4 years later, on a bright Saturday morning in June, Amara Osei walked across a stage. She was 39 years old. She wore a black gown and a hood trimmed in green, the color of the medical school. Her name was called by the dean of the University of Illinois Chicago College of Medicine, and when she stood, the audience erupted. Not the polite applause that greets every graduate. Something louder, something that came from the gut, because the people in that auditorium knew her story. Not all of them, but enough. The classmates who'd studied with her, the professors who'd watched her outperform students a decade younger, the hospital staff who'd come to see one of their own cross the line from the lowest rung to the highest. She walked to the podium, received her degree, Doctor of Medicine, specialization in pediatric hematology, the study of blood diseases in children, the exact field that had defined Elijah's life, and in a way she couldn't have predicted her own. She turned to face the audience. In the 5th row, Elijah Fairfax sat between his father and Denise Osei. Elijah was 11 now, tall for his age, healthy. His AIHA had gone into sustained remission 18 months ago, thanks to a combination therapy developed by Medicore AI's research division, informed in part by clinical observations Amara had contributed during her residency. Rotations. The disease that had nearly killed him had become the bridge that connected his treatment to her training. Denise sat in a wheelchair. She was 74 now, thin, but her eyes were bright and her back was straight, and she was wearing the same gold earrings she'd worn the day she first took Amara to donate blood in Accra. Julian sat with his hands folded in his lap. He wasn't crying yet. He would be. Amara looked down at the audience from the stage. Hundreds of faces, but she found the one she was looking for. Elijah was holding something up, a piece of paper, creased, yellowed at the edges, torn in one corner from years of handling. The drawing, the blood lady, a stick figure with brown skin and big hands holding a red heart. He'd kept it. For 7 years, he'd kept it. And now he was holding it up in an auditorium full of people smiling at the woman who had once been his midnight storyteller and his anonymous lifeline, and who was now officially a doctor. Amara looked at that drawing and felt everything at once. Every night shift, every pint of blood, every floor she'd mopped, every time she'd been looked through like glass. Every time she'd sat with a scared child in the dark and told stories about oceans and fishermen and kindness. It all came down to this. A piece of paper in a boy's hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She looked at her hands. The same hands that had mopped floors and donated blood and comforted a scared little boy in the dark. Now they would hold a stethoscope. But they would never forget where they'd been. Thank you for following Amara's incredible journey from invisible CNA to the doctor who helped save the boy she'd been saving all along. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people you walk past every day, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Here's the truth. There are people in your life right now who are giving everything they have and getting nothing in return. People who show up every day, do the hardest work, and never get seen. They're in your hospitals, your schools, your offices, your neighborhoods. They're mopping floors and driving buses and stocking shelves and caring for your parents and your children. And most of us walk right past them. Amara's mother used to say something that I want you to carry with you. Blood is the one thing rich and poor share equally. When you give it, you give life itself. So I have 2 questions for you. When was the last time you donated blood? And when was the last time you truly saw someone you walk past every day? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this video with someone who gives without being seen. And if you or someone you know has a rare blood type, please consider becoming a regular donor. You might be the only match for a child who's counting on you. Until next time, stay kind, stay giving, and never underestimate the power of what flows through your veins. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one.